Member for Surrey Newton.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead, Minister of Transportation. I like that. Mr. Speaker, it is always an honor and privilege to stand here and speak on issues that affect our constituents, affect our province, Mr. Speaker, and not too many people get the opportunity that we get as elected representative of our community. And I'm really thankful for that, for at least my constituents to send me here and give me the opportunity to represent them and speak on issues that matters to British Columbians and to my constituents. Mr. Speaker, Bill 36, Auditor General for Local Government Amendment Act, I think it's, if you look at the history behind this particular bill and when when originally AGLG office was created and a number of other government actions, it reflects that this government is willing to say one thing and have no intention of complying with what they say. And they do quite the opposite. There are examples after examples after examples. And I'll speak about that in a minute. Mr. Speaker, when you look at when they established this office, it wasn't that it was needed. It was a political decision made by this premier because she was told during her leadership campaign that this would be a good political position to take for her to get her chances a little better than the others if she take this position, because she couldn't secure very much support from the then existing caucus except one, and I don't know what happened to that person, and we all know that. Mr. Speaker, so the office was created, whether it was needed or not, because she made that commitment. Mr. Speaker, this is the government that talk about cutting red tape. We wasted last week a lot of time talking about red tape day legislation here. Mr. Speaker, all of that can be done with IOC through regulations, but nonetheless they wanted to discuss that and waste this House's time for just that. And they just talked about red tape, cut red tape day. And the creation of this office is nothing more than red tape. Nothing more than red tape. And then, Mr. Speaker, what we are talking about today, this bill, it's adding more red tape to the original red tape. So the word comes to mind called hypocrisy. That's exactly what this government has established themselves with. Hypocrisy after hypocrisy. There are numerous examples that I could sit here and read out. Mr. Speaker, you talk about recall of this House last week. You would think there are some urgent issues that face our constituents in this province that we will be discussing those today, last week and this week and going forward. No, Mr. Speaker, we are just looking at dealing with bills that are non-issues. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, you remember the first day we came here, Bill 29 was discussed. You know what was Bill 29? It was telling the municipalities, don't do what they have never done. Don't do what they have never done. And that's what this government thought was the priority going into this fall session. Mr. Speaker, then we had this cut red tape day. Was that more important than talking about all of the issues that we in the question period brought up by the opposition, but so many vulnerable children out there under the government care? How do we make that system work, Mr. Speaker? No, that didn't come from the government. Kicking and screaming, they are dragged into discussing that issue by the opposition, Mr. Speaker. Just shows the priorities of this government. and just shows that they are lost in the way. They have run out of ideas, Mr. Speaker, how to run this government. All politics, all the time, rather than sitting down, listening to the British Columbians' issues, and dealing with them in a serious manner, Mr. Speaker. That is lacking by this government. And I think that is insult to all of the constituents, all of the people that elected us. They pay big bucks to send us here, Mr. Speaker, and they expect us to deal with the issues that affect them on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, forest industry is on its knees right now. Softwood lumber dispute is just being discussed, but no discussion by this government on that issue. How do we keep our raw logs that are being exported at a record rate from this province last year and year before and continuing on today? How do we keep those raw logs, and how do we invite investors to come and invest in British Columbia so that they can utilize those raw logs right here in British Columbia to create jobs for British Columbians in BC, Mr. Speaker? That is not being discussed. How do we add value to the product that we produce here in British Columbia forest industry? That is not being discussed. How do we learn from Ontario and Quebec, who produced 3 to more times more jobs on a unit of lumber that is harvested from their forest than in BC? How do we at least get close to them, Mr. Speaker? That is not being discussed. Those are real jobs. This Premier wants to talk about jobs, but when there's an opportunity, the jobs are for people from Alberta or from China, Mr. Speaker, or we bring temporary foreign workers here, Mr. Speaker, and they get exploited. They have no protection from this government, Mr. Speaker, and people of British Columbians and their children are not even in the lineup for those jobs, Mr. Speaker. And here we're talking about Bill 36 today, which again is adding more red tape to the original red tape that they created, Mr. Speaker. When are we going to talk about, Mr. Speaker, about fighting crime in the province? Fighting crime and gangs in Surrey, Mr. Speaker. This is the time that we should be talking about those serious issues. People in Surrey and Lower Mainland and Abbotsford, Mr. Speaker, they are afraid. They are afraid to leave their homes, to take their kids to the neighborhood park, Mr. Speaker, because they're not sure that they are safe out there. They're not sure that they are safe in their own homes, Mr. Speaker. I brought that issue here in one cul-de-sac with 33 homes, Mr. Speaker, in the Minister of Technology's writing, right in his backyard, Mr. Speaker, 17 break-ins in 6 months period. Is the government going to do anything about that? Have they done anything about that? Is the Minister of Technology going to do anything about that? No, we want to talk about non-issues here. Waste our time, waste our taxpayers' dollars, Mr. Speaker, on bills like this. They should scrap this bill, Mr. Speaker. Scrap this bill, Mr. Speaker.
How about you produce some jobs?
And Mr. Speaker, I wish he was here. I wish he was here when I was talking about jobs in the forest industry. And these people don't even know the trees from the forest, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the jobs. None whatsoever, Mr. Speaker. All talk, no action. That's the history of this government. All talk, no action. Mr. Speaker, they like to come here and boast about jobs, but when the real opportunity comes, Mr. Speaker, HD mining, you remember? HD mining, the jobs will come from China. Mr. Speaker,
Do you go back and
Mr.
talk
Speaker,
any?
Mr. Speaker, Bill 36 does not talk about...
Member?
Mr. Speaker, Bill 36 does not talk about issues that are relevant to people in Surrey, relevant to the people of Minister of Technology, Mr. Speaker. They will come here, Mr. Speaker. They think that they represent those people. But what are they talking about cutting crime, Mr. Speaker? Have you heard any one of them, Minister of Translink, has he talked about cutting crime? There are 3 ministers, Mr. Speaker, from Surrey, 3 ministers. You think they would have some pull on the cabinet table?
Order, member.
He started it. That's right. Are you next? Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making here is they will not get, because they're brought in here, given some notes to talk about by the Premier's office, and they have some political agenda, no doubt, but there are some real issues that are missing from these discussions, Mr. Speaker. They like to sit here, yap about something that is non-issue to the people of the province, Mr. Speaker. Like I said, when are they going to talk about how do we deal with prolific and repeat offenders in Surrey, Mr. Speaker? Is there a strategy? No strategy. Is any of the minister from Surrey talk about that, Mr. Speaker? I have not heard that. People of Surrey have not heard of that. Where is that strategy, if there's one, Mr. Speaker? They talk about 100 additional police officers. My question to this government is, where were they last 10 years? Why were they not brought in 10 a year, Mr. Speaker? That's what happened. You know why, Mr. Speaker? They ignored the issue of crime, and finally it's catching up. It caught up, and who's paying the price for their neglect and ignorance, Mr. Speaker, is the people of Surrey. That's what's happening. It's a sad state of affairs, Mr. Speaker. You would think that with 3 ministers on the cabinet that they would actually speak about Surrey and bring some more resources to the Surrey city, Mr. Speaker. I have not seen that. And when you talk about they have 42, the other day I heard one of the ministers say there are 42 on the streets today, Mr. Speaker. Guess what? When you really dig through, 30 of them are to replace the existing officers that have already left. So we got 12 net gain of police officers. No wonder gangs and gang members are running around in Surrey, in Delta, in Lower Mainland with impunity. Mr. Speaker, in impunity. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Technology talked about wrong information, Mr. Speaker, and he probably has been sleeping. He has been sleeping for the last 4 months, Mr. Speaker, and that doesn't surprise me. 44 shootings, Mr. Speaker, for the Minister of Technology Information. 44 shootings in the last 4 months. And the most recent one, Mr. Speaker, of elementary school. Walls were shot at elementary school, Mr. Speaker. Bill 36, Mr. Speaker, does not talk about any of that. Bill 36, Mr. Speaker, is another waste of time. Another waste of time of this House, Mr. Speaker. And you know what, Mr. Speaker? Bill 36, you know, I said hypocrisy and the hypocritic actions of this government clearly illustrate in this bill. Remember, Mr. Speaker, you will remember that, March of this year, when that issue was brought up, when $5 million was wasted on this office that produced only 1 audit. When we brought that issue in this House, what the minister said at that time, minister said this: we're always looking for ways that we can support local governments and efficiencies and accountability. Ultimately, all BC residents stand to benefit from the work of the Auditor General for local government as it identifies ways to help local communities deliver effective, efficient economic service to the taxpayer. She went on to say, the AGLG, as I said in the previous, is a functionally independent office with a high degree of autonomy. Independent office with a high degree of autonomy. What are we talking about today? Putting controls over that office of this government. The Auditor General of the province, Mr. Speaker, is completely independent. That is the office that they could use to do the audits that they have created with this office of AGLG, Mr. Speaker, wasting taxpayers' money. Now we are adding more controls. on the office that was supposed to be independent office. Mr. Speaker, again, hypocrisy at the highest level, Mr. Speaker. Somebody should stand up and challenge me on that. Mr. Speaker, how is that not hypocrisy? One hand, you're telling us only a few months in this House that this office is completely independent and have total autonomy. Now we are putting control. It will be at the minister's whim to terminate them, suspend them, fire them. How is that independent, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, that's the kind of stuff that people, when they listen to this House and the speeches and what the agenda this government brings in, Mr. Speaker, that's how you lose faith. That's how you lose respect for politicians. Mr. Speaker, it's about time the government start to act on behalf of the people of the province rather than all politics all the time, Mr. Speaker. Here's another example. Say one thing one day and do quite the opposite, Mr. Speaker. March 9th, March 3rd was the first court, March 9th. When we raised the issue again, Mr. Speaker, the minister said again, it is good opportunity to remind the member opposite again that as we know, for any auditor to be effective, it needs to be independent from politicians. In this case, it is here as well. Mr. Speaker, that's what minister said March 9th. Now under this bill, the minister have all the controls. Compared to the Auditor General of the province, Auditor General of the province report to this House. You have to have majority of this House to terminate that office. Here in this case, which is supposed to be independent, and the minister said in order for them to be effective, they must be independent of politicians. But now we are putting controls. The government will control that office, Mr. Speaker. The minister will be determining when to terminate that office. How is that independent? How is that not hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker? Again, say one thing, do another. When there are so many other issues, Mr. Speaker, that I talked about that we need to talk about in this House. Public transportation, the extension to Surrey. This is the government again made a political decision to put it through a referendum, abrogating their responsibility altogether, Mr. Speaker, and show no leadership. Throw it on the mayors that you decide how you want to pay for the public transportation. Mr. Speaker, that's what we should be talking about rather than Bill 36. Bill 36, we are again talking about here. There's nothing here, Mr. Speaker, that we should be talking about. Those are important issues. And the Minister of Transportation should be talking about some of the serious issues the people of Surrey and south of Fraser are talking that they need to address. Port Mann was being celebrated as complete project on time, on budget, Mr. Speaker, they said. But in fact, it was way over budget, almost twice. Mr. Speaker,
Member,
this is Mr. Speaker.
Member,
This is totally fine.
second reading of the bill. Second reading of the bill, 36.
It's the second reading, Mr. Speaker. Yes, of course we can talk about so many different issues in a second reading, Mr. Speaker, and like they have not used this opportunity in the past themselves, Mr. Speaker. The truth hurts. I understand that, and that's why they don't want me to continue to speak on this the way the discussion should take place. They think it should be simply, you talk about exactly what they like to hear, and then we sit up. But that's not going to happen from this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We will bring issues that are important to the people of the province because they elected us to hold their feet to the fire, Mr. Speaker, and hold them accountable. And here, again, is a bill that take away complete accountability and transparency out of the office that should be built in. That should be built in, Mr. Speaker. Minister will decide. It will be, all the powers are going to the minister rather than having this office to be complete independent, Mr. Speaker. None whatsoever. So when is the minister going to stand up and talk about why we wasted or losing $100 million on Port Mann Bridge, Mr. Speaker, every year? $100 million last year alone. When is he going to talk about that, Mr. Speaker? It's the people of south of Fraser paying through tolls, Mr. Speaker. They will be paying more tolls, longer time, Mr. Speaker. They should be talking about that, giving some relief to the people of Surrey and south of Fraser. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if the minister and this government is really worried about, they talk about the traffic and the traffic jams, Mr. Speaker. South of the Surrey, Mr. Speaker, south of the Fraser, Mr. Speaker, and they don't like to hear the truth here now, and I could see all of them are now chirping away out there, making no sense, Mr. Speaker, to deal with issues that we need to talk about. South of the Fraser, Mr. Speaker, got about half of the service on transportation than the people in Vancouver, Burnaby, and Surrey has, the Richmond has, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Bill 36, instead of Bill 36, we should be talking about some of those issues. It's not that, Mr. Speaker, that Richmond and Vancouver has, the perfect situation as far as the public transportation, Mr. Speaker. No. They need improvement. We need improvement. That's how you, Mr. Speaker, eliminate traffic jams. For the information on Mr. Transportation, Mr. Speaker. And I would love to invite Minister of Transportation, come along with the Minister of Translink, I think, and the Minister of Technology. Let's go to Surrey Memorial Hospital and see what's happening there, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let's go and take a look how people are made to wait 6, 7, 8 hours in the emergency ward, Mr. Speaker. Are they going to talk about that? Are they going to bring a bill here, Mr. Speaker, to how do we eliminate wait times in Surrey Memorial Hospital? No, Mr. Speaker.
Member. Order.
Mr. Speaker, ask him to stick to the bill.
Member, on Bill 36. On Bill 36.
On Bill 36, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely agree that it is important. It is very, very important. If they want to challenge, me, Mr. Speaker, they should stand up and ask you a question, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure they will now. I just encourage them to do that and do the right job. Mr. Speaker, the Bill 36 is such a flawed bill again, Mr. Speaker. The ministers stand up here and says one thing, and then they are doing quite the opposite by bringing this bill in, Mr. Speaker. How is that good governance? How is that representing the people of this province, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, I go on to say I was up to March 9th, Mr. Speaker. Now let's go to March 10th. Let's go to March 10th on Bill 36. The minister responsible again said, I would have hoped that the member opposite, it is an independent office. The report by the Audit Council was put on file in February, Mr. Speaker. So setting more government control is somehow more independent, Mr. Speaker? That's not how you run these independent offices. If they are independent offices, let's make them independent. Let them perform and be effective by being truly independent, Mr. Speaker. That's not the case here. That's not the case here, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what I like to say here, the UBCM just held their convention just recently, Mr. Speaker. Look at the timing of this. They passed a resolution at the UBCM calling on the government to disband this AGLG office, passed with 55%. It can thus we extrapolate that a slim majority of the BC municipalities do not support legislation that retain the office. So they're talking about eliminate this office altogether, Mr. Speaker. But this government is making it more ineffective by taking more control or giving more control to the minister. That's not a good government, Mr. Speaker. In August, the UBCM issued out a survey report criticizing this office, it is unlikely that this legislation that gives sweeping power to the minister is the answer to their concerns, Mr. Speaker. What do they have to say about that? Nothing. They be quiet. And people of the province deserve better from this government. When they need them, when they need the premier, when they need these ministers, when they need this government on their side, whether to deal with the issues in the forest industry, issues about public transportation, fighting crime in their neighborhood, Mr. Speaker, making WCB to work better for the injured workers, Mr. Speaker, rather than cutting their benefits, cutting their rehab funding, Mr. Speaker, making it difficult for them to get back to work, Mr. Speaker. That's something that this government needs to do, Mr. Speaker. That would be a good government. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm totally disappointed that this government continue to bring political agenda here. Political decisions are being made rather than dealing with all those issues that I just mentioned, Mr. Speaker. I hope, because I know when people put their name forward to run for these offices, Mr. Speaker, there are some very good people out there. There are some very good people on that side, Mr. Speaker. And I think they do want to do a good job to represent their constituents, Mr. Speaker. Because as a human beings, we all want to do a good job when a job is given to us. But, Mr. Speaker, when you have a premier's office that is all politics all the time, when they're not on your side when we talk about some of these issues, Mr. Speaker, then people start to lose faith in you. They lose faith in the government, Mr. Speaker. And do what you plan, do what you say, Mr. Speaker, and back up what you say with your action, Mr. Speaker. Be on the side of the people that sent you here, Mr. Speaker. But so far what we've seen, whether it's a Bill 36 or it was Bill 29 that we discussed last week, Mr. Speaker, the government is not on the side of the people of the British Columbians. They're not. They are more interested in politics than real policy matters, Mr. Speaker. And Bill 36 exactly says that. That's exactly what they need to do, is disband this office altogether, save taxpayers' money, and use the provincial Auditor General to do the job that they want AGLG to do. Wouldn't that be more efficient? Would that be less red tape, Mr. Speaker? And you know what? The Minister of Minister Community, Minister of TransLink, Mr. Speaker, I had hoped better from that minister, but listening to his chirping away at here, Mr. Speaker, it doesn't show that, and I'm really disappointed because they can do better. That minister can do better. I know they want to do better, but the office of the province has set their agenda totally based on politics rather than real policy matters, Mr. Speaker. Many issues that I mentioned, and I think they should show some leadership individually, and they could go to the premier and say, look, there are some serious issues in Surrey like crime. There are some more serious issues like building more schools in Surrey, Mr. Speaker, for children who are in portables right now, 7,000 students. We need to pay more attention to that. We need to pay more attention to those people who are made to wait in hospital, in Surrey Memorial Hospital for 6, 7, 8 hours to get emergency treatment, Mr. Speaker. That's the kind of leadership people are expecting from our representative from Surrey, Mr. Speaker. That's not what, they don't expect us to waste our time and their money on debating Bill like 36. We should be disbanded altogether and transfer that duty over to the provincial attorney general, Mr. Speaker. That's what they should be doing. With that, Mr. Speaker, I take my seat, and I am disappointed that they keep on bringing non-issues to this House for this fall session. Thank you very much.